and it's still a muscle that responds the same way to training as any other muscle group. So why are we training them completely different?
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Truth Talks, the podcast that brings you real strategies for sustainable fitness transformation. We have a hot topic today, one that I think everyone kind of talks about in some way, shape, or form when they think about fitness, and it is abs. Abs, the abdominal muscle group that for some reason everybody seems to be sort of obsessed with. Is that a harsh word to say, obsessed with?
Yeah, I mean, some people are.
That's true. And I think what's interesting as we start out with this is like, I was thinking about this when we were talking about doing this topic. I don't even know why people have this infatuation with abs. Like, where did this come from? Just this sense of like abs as a symbol of being fit. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times marketing almost put things in our minds as we think it's our idea, but in reality, subconscious, we would be tricked to think a certain way. So when a lot of magazines had abs was like the front page, constantly bombarded by just abs. Then in your mind, you're like, oh, that means I'm in shape if I have abs. So then we're deeply ingrained. Also, the second thing to think about is cool things are cool because usually people don't have them. Like I give the analogy too of like, why are Ferraris cool? Because not many people have Ferraris. If everybody had a Ferrari, Ferraris wouldn't be very cool. So, I mean, maybe, no, they wouldn't. They kind of wouldn't be. Like, cars are, like, a normal car is not like, oh my gosh, this is such a great, car.
Prius.
It's like, a Prius. It's like, no hate on Priuses. But it's not cool because everybody has a car.
Right.
But not many people have a Ferrari, which is why Ferraris are cool. Same thing with abs. Not a large percentage of the population has abdominal muscles that you can see visibly, which is why it's cool when you see it.
So it starts with an exclusivity principle. And marketing does create sense of exclusivity. That's true. Mm-hmm. We also, I think, grew up in an era where Abercrombie was everywhere. And that was one of the influences in my teen years. You walk into the store and there's this big male model with abs. And I mean, they got into some trouble for some stuff. But Abercrombie. It's so funny. But there were all these like influences with that. They took that sense of exclusivity and made it cool, and then also made it the thing that everybody was desiring. Like it became very associated with desire. Let's remember, we didn't always live as humans. I mean, me and you, yes, but as the human population didn't always live in an era where abs were the be all and end all. There was a point in time where being a little bit overweight was an indicator of your wealth because you could afford to eat well and you could afford to be indulgent. So we are now in a society where abs are prized. That hasn't always been the case.
It's true. And a lot of times they are also like in a way sexualized too in a lot of media where it's like sexy if you have abs. And even I remember when I was 13, I would be like working out and girls would be like, well, do you have abs? And I'd be like, no, but that was their marker to see if like you were in shape or you worked out. But I'm like, it's kind of harsh, but it's true.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting situation, right? So anyways, that's kind of the entry into the conversation, which is important to talk about, I think, before we actually dive into more things.
Absolutely. And right now, my big sister instincts are kicking in, and I just want to go protect 13-year-old parents from all the mean girls.
He's fine. He's got a good long-term partner.
Yeah, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. We know he'll be fine. Yeah, but it's true, right? Like obviously there's a lot of other indicators around your fitness level, whether that's your cardiovascular fitness or your strength or like the list goes on and on, and I'm not even going to try to tackle it. But there's so many ways you can be fit, but for whatever reason people keep coming back to this abs component. So because it's a hot topic, we are going to talk about it, but we're going to have an honest conversation about abs today too. So hopefully people take some perspective out of this episode. And like you said, we started with this part of the conversation for a reason, to anchor in the fact that like, I'm just going to say it from the front. We don't think they're be all and end all of everything, right? But we do want to provide some practical guidance to help people who are looking to understand how they can get abs if they want abs, all of that. So that's what we're going to dive into today. Let's go for it.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, having abs is pretty cool.
Of course.
It is. If that's what you like. If you like that, when you get them, it is a cool feeling being like, I got abs and I'm on the beach and it's cool.
Yeah. And you know what? Maybe it's
if that's what you want.
Yeah. If that's what you want, it can also be a great way to evaluate how far you've come. right? Or what kind of progress you've made. If you've suddenly got abs, it's like, okay, that might be a testament to other efforts that you've made too. And I think that's pretty rewarding.
That's a real thing.
Right? Yeah. That's a real thing. Yeah. So let's talk about like the foundations of abs. Let's start there. What are abs? It sounds like a kind of a very, very basic question, but I want to ask it because when we're talking about abs, what are we actually talking about?
Yeah, so typically the quote-unquote six-pack muscle is your rectus abdominis, which the main role is spinal flexion, which is curving the spine, like, crunching, like bringing your chest towards your hips kind of thing. And that's like its main function in the body. And that's what abs are.
So it's really just this underlying muscle group in your core area that actually serves a purpose beyond aesthetics. And so when you're thinking about saying, okay, somebody has abs or they don't have abs, well, if it's a muscle group that's functional in the human body, technically everybody has abs because everybody has those abdominal muscles.
Yes.
So when we say somebody has abs or they don't, what are we actually referring to?
We're referring to a few different things. And I think maybe this is like a good way to phrase of how to actually have abs. You need to check a few boxes. Number one, that area has to be lean enough for you to visibly be able to see the muscle group underneath it. And number two, you need to have enough development so that the muscle group is developed enough so that when you're lean enough, they are, popping or whatever, like they're developed enough so you can tangibly see them. And then the third one would be you actually need to have the genetic structure, if we're talking about a six-pack, to actually have the structure of those muscles to be arrayed in a six-pack area. Like if you look closely at my physique when I'm like super lean, it's more like a 3.5, 4.5 pack. But then you'll see other people, like we just posted our competition prep with Brody, one of our clients, and like you see, he has like a very symmetrical, dominant six-pack,
like a washboard.
Yeah, it's like pretty much like a washboard because he combines all those three variables. He was very lean in that vlog. He's extremely great genetics for body fat distribution, meaning he doesn't hold much fat there, but also for how his muscles insert to have that actual structure. Mm-hmm. If I have a 4.5 pack, if that's a structure, no matter how much I work them, how lean I get, they'll never be like a washboard look. It's just not going to happen. I'm not going to get them surgically reattached,
Right, because you're just built that way. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just you, right?
Yeah,
it's
important to know.
Right, it is important to know because how much less pressure do you put on yourself when you're not you're like, you know what? That is my genetic structure and that's the way I'm built. Like, yes, you can still work on getting lean and you can still work on developing those muscles, but it's also just kind of like a relief to know that like at a certain point you can do everything you can and that's it, right? And not sound like you can't do more than that, but I think it is important to say like there's nothing wrong with what you're doing if you don't get that perfect six-pack.
Yeah.
I do want to just take a moment and like create a parallel to another muscle group just for context, because when people think about muscles, they think about like their biceps, right? And if you think about looking at somebody's arms, what's going to impact how their bicep looks, right? Their bicep's going to pop more if they're leaner because they're carrying less body fat around that area. They might have trained their biceps so it's grown, so it's bigger, so it's more visible. And they might also have really good bicep genetics in terms of, where those muscles insert into different points on the arms. You think about someone like Arnold, he's kind of created this gold standard of like
peak.
The peak, right? Exactly. But not everybody will have that quote unquote peak based on their genetic structure. So I just wanted to draw that comparison because it does help us think about the abs as yet another muscle group in the body when we can actually say, okay, same principles. You outlined 3 amazing checkboxes. Kind of applies no matter what body part we're talking about.
Yeah.
Let's dive into each of those 3 checkboxes for a minute. The first one you talked about was being lean enough. That's fat loss, right? Second one you talked about was training. And the third one was genetics. I actually want to tackle those in like reverse order.
Okay.
So let's talk about the genetic component. I think you did mention a lot about that, just kind of sharing your own experience. But is there anything else you want people to consider there?
Not really. I think it's just good to know. But most people don't know until you get lean enough. That's again, right? Like once you're at a leanness where you can see your midsection and the development there, then you'll know what kind of structure that you have. And a lot of people just actually never even have gone that lean to.
Some people also, just play devil's advocate, find out really early. There were those like kids in high school that had abs, but they hadn't spent years training and they weren't necessarily that lean all around. It was like quote unquote skinny abs, right? It's just because that's where their genetic insertions were. So I think you can know, okay, maybe that's an indicator if you're at a young age or you haven't really spent that time developing or focusing on your training. You might have a genetic predisposition to good ab structure. But then likewise, a lot of people will never know until they get to a point where they're consciously looking to find them.
Yes. And I know we talked a lot about fat distribution pattern in this episode, last episode, and the genetic one, but I just want to put it again before. Don't necessarily think that, just because you're at X given body fat percentage that you will automatically have abs. Somebody might, maybe you will, maybe you won't. Because if you store more in your midsection than you do anywhere else, you're going to have to get leaner in terms of overall body fat percentage wise to eventually then see the abs, versus somebody else who might be walking around 5 percentage points higher, but they might already see their abs, or vice versa.
Right. That's so critical, because I think there's also these things like I've seen them, sometimes they're even in textbooks, and sometimes they're just floating around online, but these images to help you contextualize, quote unquote, different levels of body fat in both men and women. And oftentimes it's like a sketch of like what somebody's abs would look like at those different body fat levels. And I completely understand for education purposes, it does provide perspective, or you can see relative differences. But I think I would advise not to get attached to like this body fat percentage looks like this for that exact reason, is like your body fat distribution patterns are going to look so different. So if you're looking at a sketch that says, hey, if I'm a woman and I'm at 20% body fat, I should have 6-pack abs. No, right? That's just not going to be the case. Always.
You might, but you
might. Yeah. If you do, awesome. Super cool. But
or you might have them at a higher body fat percentage.
You might, right, exactly. So I feel like you and I say this all the time, but individualization, personalization, self-awareness, understanding your own context is everything, especially when it comes to abs.
Yeah. And maybe we'll save this point for later, but I do want to touch on why it's more realistic for some people to maintain abs where other people might, but maybe we'll park that for now.
Yeah, let's come back to that though, because I think that's really valuable. Let's go through that second checkbox. Okay, so second checkbox was training abs. Do we have some practical tips and tricks of how somebody can develop their abs through training? Because yes, they might have genetics that predispose them to be more likely to have abs or not, but it's not like that's the only thing. You can still actively work on developing your abs. How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so because we need them to be developed in order to make them pop, they'll also look leaner at any given body fat percentage if they are more developed, like we've said previously. But I think people train all their other muscle groups with great principles of progression, training heavy with good frequency and volume, and progressing over time and choosing good movement patterns. But then their abs, they'll do like sets of 40 for like 5-minute circuits at the end of the workout. And you're like, it's still a muscle group, and it's still a muscle that responds the same way to training as any other muscle group. So why are we training them completely different? So I think we need to train our abs very similarly as we train any other muscle group. But I do think for the rectus abdominis muscle, that like quote unquote 6-pack muscle, we are a little bit more limited in terms of exercise selection, just because primarily its spinal flexion is like
one function, right?
Yeah,
one function.
Essentially. Yeah. One main function. Obviously it's going to, so you do want what I call like top down and down top kind of movement. So top down would be like crunches, so like bring your chest towards your hips, and then the down up ones would be like leg lifts, like bring your hips curling up to your chest. So my favorites would be like weighted cable crunches, which are awesome. Things like jackknives, or like when you go to the captain's chair and you bring your leg raises. If you can't do those, you do them on the ground. There's lots of different progression schemes and different ways to kind of divvy these things up, but like those are the two main ones.
Yeah, and one thing you just mentioned, I want to dwell on it for a second, was you said one exercise you love is weighted cable crunches, right? And I think in the same way that we look to load a muscle with weights when we're training a bicep or training another muscle group, like you've touched on, we're training another muscle here. If you are capable enough and you have the strength to add load to your ab training, it can be highly advantageous, right? So if you are able to do, like, let's say you're doing a set of crunches and you're like 100, 101, 102. Okay. That might be a little inefficient, but also indicative of like, you have an opportunity to maybe add some load. You don't need to do like endless crunches. Make those crunches more efficient and more effective by finding a way to load them and train that muscle with a load like you would other muscle groups.
Yeah, it's great. Like It's kind of like if you trained your bicep curls and you stayed at 2.5 pounds and did sets of 100 for your whole entire training career. Probably not. So why are we doing abs like that? Like seriously, people, come on.
Yeah.
So like cable crunches are great once you get them down because you can progressively load them. You know how much you're lifting. Same thing with like decline crunches. You can make the decline more or less. You can add a plate on on your chest or something.
Yeah, and a lot of people who work out in commercial gyms too, there's often like a seated ab crunch machine. That's another great way to do it. Again, because there's different intervals of weight and load that you can add and you can progress over time. So that's awesome. And I do want to, like everything, I have to caveat because it's important. Today, we are talking about abs and ab training for the purpose of aesthetic ab development, muscle visuals. So we are not talking about people who have strong cores for like functional training. That is a whole other domain, an important one, of course, because that's like, core stability is how you move about your day to day. And there's a lot of benefit to that. But for today's context, that's not the avenue we're walking down. We're focusing on training for the purpose of aesthetics.
Yes.
Okay. Alrighty. So the third checkbox that you had talked about was you have to be lean enough to see the abs. So what does that entail? Well, getting lean does entail fat loss.
Yes.
And if anybody listened to last week's episode, in last week's episode, we talked about the fact that you can't spot reduce fat loss, right? So I can't choose, I'm going to lose fat in my belly area and I'll get abs. If I could, that would be amazing, but I can't. So what do you do to get lean enough to show your abs?
Definitely go watch the other episode if you're more intrigued in this. But to summarize it, as we had mentioned there, was you just need to keep getting leaner until those pockets of fat go. And as we talked about with the body fat distribution, it might come quicker or it might come later. But you'll never know until you start losing the body fat and truly know like where it comes off first. So, but most people like don't see their abs at a high body fat percentage. Most people are not blessed with that kind of body fat distribution. Most people have to get relatively lean compared to the average population in order for their abs to show.
And so if you just consistently follow a calorie deficit, structured calorie deficit, keep up with your training, of course, too, while you're at it. But if you follow that calorie deficit at a certain point, you are going to be more likely to be lean enough to see those abs, right? And see every previous point we made about the asterisks about that. But that's the only way you can get lean is follow a calorie deficit and see how lean you get. And at what point you might start to see some abs showing. And some abs showing could be, for some people, that full six pack. For some people, it might be the top two. But it gives you that sense of, okay, I'm starting to see something. Yeah. And if you do need help, I'm just gonna plug it. If you do need help pursuing a fat loss diet, we are here to help. That's one of our areas of expertise. So we can definitely help you set up your nutrition protocol to get you there and to start seeing some progress there.
Yeah, you can see a lot of abs on the transformations page on the website.
Yeah, that's true. We've worked with a lot of gifted people too.
That is true.
We've also worked with some people who never thought they could see their abs, and they've seen them too, which is also pretty nice.
That is also true.
Yeah.
That is also true.
One thing I do not want to forget to talk about today is the trade-offs of having abs, because we just ended our previous point around this idea of consistently getting leaner and leaner and leaner until you see your abs. But, at a certain point in time, you can't just keep getting leaner. Can we talk quickly about like the trade-offs of having abs? Because there are trade-offs you have to make.
Like negatively impacting your life at some point.
I'm going to provide my female perspective here.
Okay.
Just because that's what I'm here for.
Yeah.
For women, getting to extreme levels of leanness does come with hazards that men don't necessarily face.
That is correct. Yeah.
One of them is loss of menstrual cycle. Which is a significant indicator of potential health concerns. So I do want to say that, for women, there can be different hazards than for men.
Yes.
And again, it's not the same for all women. Different levels of leanness are appropriate for different people, are natural for different people. Women in general, I don't think always have the same stigma, quote unquote, of chasing abs as men do. But I do want to say that might be why I had this concept in my mind, which obviously takes things a little bit more to the extreme, but some people do take things to extreme. So we're here to protect you against that part.
Yeah, we will say if you are a female physique competitor and nobody talks about this is a whole different combo as well.
We'll do a whole episode on this.
Probably, most of you will lose your menstrual cycle along the way. Nobody talks about that. But for women, like for guys, we're easy. You feed us back up and okay, sex drive is back. little guys working again, that kind of thing. But for women, unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't come back. I mean, if you know how to recover yourself properly, that's a big thing as well. And diet also in a safer manner to get to extreme levels of leanness. You can mitigate some of these things or delay it as much as possible and bounce back relatively fast. But the truth is, a lot of women don't get their menstrual cycle regular for a significant period of time following a diet. And again, we won't jump into that conversation, but it's just good to know. So anyways,
if you are a woman who's thinking about getting abs, that is a trade-off to consider of like how lean can you get naturally for you and your body type
before it's unhealthy.
Yeah. So that is probably the most extreme trade-off when it comes to the conversation of abs. But I think it's an important one for women to recognize.
Yeah. But unless you're competing, like you're probably not going to try to get that lean.
nor do you have to. There's no reason to. There's no reason to.
Exactly.
And if you do want to, just to like out of curiosity to be like, hey, what do I look like? Or you're like, I want to figure out where I want to grow next or something like that. Very short-lived. Mm-hmm. So the intention is to get there and get out as soon as possible. But, as the guy, Paris, you've gone through your own fat loss journeys to reveal your own abs and things like that. So are there specific trade-offs that you've sensed you've had to make?
Yeah. So this comes down to, again, some people have easier or harder times having abs and maintaining a physique that displays abs based on those factors that we talked about. But I think the main thing that we need to realize is if you can be 5% higher in body fat and have abs versus somebody else has to be 5% leaner, that 5% is a pretty big difference in lifestyle and flexibility, potentially even energy, training performance. Like I can maintain a level of leanness that I would have, abs to the people looking in, but also the lifestyle I have to live for that. Like I do have to be pretty meticulous with my diet and maintain leaner than what most people would need to maintain to see their abs, and also be somewhat more restricted in terms of the choices I make with like, social activities and dinners and those kind of variables, and sleep and appetite management. I can definitely do that because I've maintained that leanness for decent chunks of time. However, the question you need to ask yourself is that a body fat percentage for me personally that I can progress at? Because if my optimal goal is overall physique development, I need phases of building muscle and fat loss. But if I'm only searching for abs and I'm trying to hang on to that leanness, and as soon as my abs go away, it's like, oh my gosh, I got to diet again. I'm probably, for me specifically, limiting my ability to put on muscle because the body fat percentage that I progress at best in the gym and recover well and put on muscle is different from the body fat percentage that I will have abs at personally.
Say it louder for the people in the back.
Yeah.
That's my new favorite phrase. I think that's really critical. What are you actually after? Are you after consistent progress and development? Or are you after that just like one-time look? And only not you, but like only you as a person listening to this can make that decision for yourself, really. It's up to you to make that decision. But you do need to consider, I'm going to just summarize those two key points you made. One is there are lifestyle trade-offs you might have to make to be able to maintain that level of leanness. And two is there are trade-offs you might have to make on the progression front, whether that's gym performance or other physique development attributes, in order to maintain that too. So those are both really important considerations. Yeah.
For me personally, some people we know can maintain a six-pack at very high body fat percentages year-round while making awesome gains. And, if that's you, awesome. But you also got to know that not everybody is like that. So you got to, again, know like you specifically.
Yeah, know yourself and be true to yourself. Yeah. That's something our mom would say. Be true to yourself. But it's true, right?
Yeah, she does say that. Yeah,
it applies in this context too.
Shout out, Mom. Yeah.
Mom, we love you. So I do want to talk a little bit before we wrap things up around things that you think are valuable perspective or, mindsets for people to keep in mind when it comes to thinking about abs. So the next time you see somebody on social media flexing their six-pack, what's one thought you would want, members of Team Truth or anybody listening or anyone you're working with or anyone out there, period, to just keep in mind when it comes to seeing that photo?
Oof. Definitely all the things we talked about today, but also realizing like, don't play that comparison game because we just talked about a lot of variables that go into that. And it's going to be easy to press that comparison button. And I still do it sometimes too, but like now I have the objective awareness to look at things with a different lens. But especially if you're newer into your fitness journey, like you need to know these things and have that awareness of these variables in order to like look at that with a different lens. And don't try to compare yourself to those people when, that look might not be realistic for you to maintain, or it might be. But most people when they're first starting, like most people are quite a bit away from that. So don't get discouraged if you're not going to get there in 1 month. Like, you're probably going to, need some more time to get your version of that look.
Yeah. Your version of that look.
Mm-hmm.
That's such a brilliant way of putting it, to, not think about, I want to look like that, but what's my version of that look. So I think it's really important for people to remember everything you just said. And hopefully this conversation helps provide some overall perspective that when they do get tempted to push that comparison button, it's like, wait a minute, what do I know about my genetics? What about my training experience? How lean am I? And they can check themselves before they get sucked into someone else's version.
Yeah. And a lot of times the question is the juice worth the squeeze? And different seasons of life, it might be. And for different people it might be, and other times it might not be, or for different people it might not be.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Anyways.
For sure. No, I was going to say there's, as you were talking about kind of your one key takeaway, it made me think about mine is like, if, you see that photo of someone, I think it's also to remember that like a photo is a very brief snapshot. Mm-hmm. When you see somebody that has abs, it's a moment in time. It's not necessarily how they look always. And I think, there's a part of me that goes, you know what, if you achieve that look, even if it's momentary, you deserve to celebrate it a little bit, 100%. Right? Like, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's like, do a photo shoot, post your stage photos if you're a competitor, like, be proud, or like show your progress pics. Like if that is a genuine result of your hard work, that's okay. But for anybody who is seeing that, it's important to say like, oh yeah, good job. Okay, you got there. But also two things. One is that is a moment in time. There is no guarantee that person looks like that always. They might not have even looked like that when they woke up because the lighting was different, or they're wearing something different. So I think it's just like so important to say like, this is still a moment in time. Somebody's abs in one photo are not how they look always.
Yes.
And that is so, so, so important to consider.
Yeah. Context lighting does a lot.
I also just got to say this. If you are somebody who's sitting there going like, I'm trying to figure out, is the juice worth the squeeze for me? And you're considering your lifestyle variables, like, this is going to sound super shallow for a second, but I'm just going to say it. If you live like in a cold temperature, AKA we live in Canada and it gets cold in the winter and you're always wearing sweaters, do I care if I have abs? Like, I don't know, maybe not. Maybe those lifestyle things are more worthwhile to me than my aesthetics, especially if I'm like not walking around in a bathing suit.
Yeah. Most of us spend very little time in the kind of attire where you would actually see our abs in the first place. However, I do think, like, for example, like for me, if I get to a place where I'm like content with the amount of muscle I have for the time being, maybe the juice is worth a squeeze for me, because also it's tied to like our business, and I try to represent, chasing a physique that you love and that you're comfortable with and that you're proud of.
Absolutely.
And so that might be something where a season of my life I am maintaining that leanness, because that's what the goal calls, and that's what's required, and that's what I want to do for that period of time. But I think most people, are not under the spotlight, and the physique is not, up there on display. Right. And for the most time, like, you don't need to be that lean for people to see like, wow, you look amazing. Like when you go, like even when I'm peak bulk and like I have zero remnants of abs, like people are like, you are in such great shape. And I'm like, what? Like the standard is so much lower in real life than it is on social media. It's bonkers. Like in real life, if you work out regularly, like, and if you're listening to this podcast, like you most likely have such a top 1% physique compared to the normal population. But then unfortunately on social media, we feel like we're like the bottom 0.0001% of physiques, because we're showcasing such a minute, tiny population in a very specific context catered in the optimal scenario to get the perfect photo.
I think it's important too, then, if you're just doing it for that external look that you may or may not even be showing the world at a given point in time, it's the wrong reasons. And that's a blunt way to put it. But if you're doing it for yourself, like you said, like maybe you take some sense of satisfaction in knowing, hey, this is where I'm sitting. I've worked hard for this. That's great, right? Like you can also have abs for yourself and like look inward. It's not just about the outward appearance. So I think that's critical.
Yes, that's the thing. And before, when I was younger, I always thought, when I get this kind of look, like that's the look is going to what make me happy. But like even last time when I was lean for the whole summer, like I was walking around Toronto with Tara and I was able to take my shirt off and be like, hey, I did this, I earned this. I don't care if anybody thinks it's great or not, but I feel confident in the body I'm rocking because it's a display of the work ethic, discipline, routine oriented, and consistency that I've done. It exemplifies the principles that I'm trying to embody as a human, and that's why it's cool. It's not cool because I'm at a certain body fat percentage or you can see my abs. It's a reflection of those things.
Mm-hmm. So anybody who was wondering who was that shirtless dude walking around Toronto last summer, we solved it.
With the small calves. The really pasty dude with the small calves, that was me.
Yeah, cool. Glad we could solve that mystery. But
holy smokes.
Nonetheless, I'm making light of it. But very important point to consider is, what does it represent to you? Because it's going to be easier or harder for you to get, you have to contextualize that to your own desires, your own perceptions, and your own meaning.
But I will say, sorry, I know I'm doing a lot of talking, but one more thing, I want to tie in what we talked about with the Ferrari thing, okay? Because it's abs are cool because not many people have it. If you're in fantastic shape, you immediately stand out because, again, it's a reflection of you have to be organized, you have to be consistent, you have to be goal-oriented, you have to have some sort of self-respect in order to get an awesome shape. You don't necessarily have to have abs. But just being in good shape is because most people, no offense, are not in very good shape. Being in good shape automatically is like people respect you, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So. And I'm going to share a little quick anecdote just on that note, because it's not really about, okay. First of all, I'm going to preface by saying there are a lot of people who are in good shape that might not necessarily have gotten there through, I don't want to say the right methods, but there could be some, some different methods at play. But I do want to share an anecdote as well as like a friend of mine who is in very good shape and takes their fitness journey very seriously, has made a point of educating themselves, and kind of lives and breathes it in their own life, was talking to me about a subject where they said a lot of people were asking for their perspective on things, and they go, oh, I'm making it seem like, people are asking for my input all the time. Like, that's not what I mean. And I was like, no, like if they are asking for your input, you have every right to embrace that because like they see you as somebody who is qualified to talk about it. And I don't think that comes from having abs or not having abs. It comes from living and breathing the principles. It comes from having a growth mindset where you're constantly looking to understand how to make self-improvements, looking to filter through the noise of the information that's out there. And that's what people will go to you for. If somebody chooses to go talk to somebody because they have abs, like, sure. But it's not necessarily going to equate to any sort of value that they get from that interaction. It's everything else that might be embodied by that. That's where the real meaning is. And I think if you are that type of person where you are wearing your work ethic, that's what matters. That's what gets noticed.
Yep, I like it.
Is that a good place to wrap things up for this week?
I think so.
I think so too. All right, everybody. This was an absolutely enlightening episode. I hope you thought so too. We tried to tackle a hot topic, which we know has a lot of sensitivities around it, but we did want to put our perspective out there because we think it's important. It's important to, take all these things into consideration, whether that's genetics to trade-offs, all of that and everything in between is just a way for us to contextualize all the imagery that we see out there. So if you have thoughts on this, if there is any particular fact or perspective that we provided that had meaning to you or changed your perspective around abs, please drop it in the comments below. We'd love to hear it, as always.